Mark's career, it all goes back to his time as a teacher and a coach at North Wilkes High School. That's where his heart was, building relationships, mentoring students. Even as he moved into leadership roles and eventually became superintendent, he never lost part of that. You could still see the Coach Byrd in him every single day. It was very special to see former students come up to him, and they didn't call him superintendent, they didn't call him Mr. Byrd, they called him coach. And they genuinely wanted to share their lives with him, where they were, what they were doing. That kind of connection doesn't just happen, it speaks to the impact that he had on people. Mark could not sit still. He was always moving and he was always thinking. He wouldn't sit behind his desk with you across the room in a meeting. He would say, let's go take a walk. He was out in schools almost every single day. And when he wasn't just passing through. He was in the halls talking to students, asking them what their favorite class was or what they were involved in after school. And that's what he valued, were those connections. And I think that's something that people will always remember about him. He valued connection, he valued conversation, and he made even the smallest moments meaningful.
I knew Mark for about 20 years. He and I usually sat side by side at the Hall of Fame meetings. Mark was a good listener, and a good leader is a good listener. He would digest what was said at the meetings, then he would speak up at that point. It didn't matter if it's something for the kids, something for Hall of Fame, something for a meeting that was coming up. He would always have time to sit down and talk about where he saw it going. You know, he was a person that I felt like was very open door policy is the way I would say it. He always had the teachers, the students, and the community on his mind. He was trying to do what was best for everybody involved. Even though he was busy, he would find time. And I think part of being a good leader is knowing who you're working with, to be on the same common grounds with that person, and that was Mark, going out of his way to know the people that he's dealing with.
I met Mark. He was a young guy, assistant coaching for North High. My son played football for Wilkes since we met through that. From that point on, we were good friends. He was just like a regular person. I mean, when he was superintendent, he was still a regular person to me. He was a good friend. We played a lot of golf together and had wagers and stuff, and I beat him, and then I would never let it down. Yeah, these are the clubs that I beat Mark with at one time with the wager, and I haven't bought a set since, so I think I hang on to him. He was like me, tell lots of jokes, have a lot of fun. He was a Cowboy fan, I was a Steeler fan. Of course, we lost to the doggone Cowboys, and I had to wear the darn jersey throughout all the schools in the system, and it was too small, you know, and I'm like hulked out, and it was too small. But anyway, he made sure that I wore it because he contacted all the secretaries, and he would be at a school or two to see if I had it on. I remember it wasn't one day, but lots of days, and my mail cart would get missing. So I went and bought a bell and I attached it to the cart. So when they moved the cart, I could hear it jingle. Well, Mark took the bell off the cart and I couldn't hear it jingle, and he hid the cart. And I'm running around through the building trying to find the mail carts.
Was that when he was still at North, or was that?
No, that's when he was a superintendent. We just had a great time. Something drew us together from the beginning.
Me and Mark first met when he came to North Wilkes as a history teacher and coach. In the beginning, you know, both of us were fairly new teachers, and when there were snow days, new teachers would come to work because you didn't have those days to trade in or take off or whatever. Mark was one of those folks that was always there. You know, we got into some mischief, and you would never think that Mark would go on to being the superintendent. On one of those snow days, we went to the tire store to get an inner tube, but the tire store was closed. So we came back to school and we found our way into the cafeteria and found the cookie sheets and took them to the baseball field where there are hills leading down to the baseball field. And we spent the afternoon sledding on those fields, and that's kind of how we got to know each other. We've had just a lifelong relationship since meeting at the high school. You know, he could juggle lots of things on our trips to see the Cowboys play because he loved the Cowboys, but always the school system was at the forefront of his thoughts. You know, here he is, the superintendent of Wilkes County Schools, and I've left Wilkes County and I'm over in Catawba County, and a softball team, we play for the Western Championship. And along that way, we upset the #1 team, West Stanley, in the state. And when I get back on the bus, my phone's blowing up, but the first phone call I get is from Mark. That's just amazing that he could take enough time to worry about his own school system, but to think about somebody in a different school system. So, those kind of things I think are stuff that I'll always cherish and remember. Mark was an avid reader. Mark's also a songwriter. There was a coach here in Wilkes County, Mr. Shannon Slaughter, and Shannon went on to, has a bluegrass band now, very successful, I think, at Alabama. One night, Mark called him and said, I want to write a song. So Shannon took his guitar and he went to Mark's house and they sat around talking, and Mark's very good about spinning a phrase. So they came up with the song, I've hit everything in life but my knees.
I've hit everything in my life but my knees.
They entered that in a songwriting contest at Merlefest, and the thing won. Shannon listed him as a co-writer because he came up with the line. So Mark was very proud. When you go over to his house, Mark would have that over in his little display case and let everybody know that he was a songwriter. We talked about Merle Haggard. We talked about, just all kinds of country songs. And on one of our trips, we went to Nashville. So have some pictures of Mark standing in the circle at the Grand Ole Opry. That was a lot of fun. And we just had a lot of fun together.
I've probably known him, I'd say, really good for about 16 years when I first got into administration with Wilkes County Schools. I know we're both from Wilkes County. I went to East, he went to North. He was a couple of years older than me, and he remembers me from sports. So we probably knew each other before then, but when I first got into administration in the principal role, there were times where something would happen at school or I wasn't really sure about it, or something happened the day before and I was worried about the next day, and it was late one evening. I said, I hate to bother you. And he's like, you're not bothering me. He just always tried to reassure you it was going to be okay. And it was kind of nice. You knew if you needed something that you could call him, and you never want to be blindsided by anything. So I think that was the main thing, is the communication part. He always gave me a hard time because I like to have fun at school with my kids. So for Halloween, I always dressed up for every principal's meeting, and there was one meeting that we had pictures made and we didn't really know, and he always gave me a hard time because I had on a Halloween costume in the pictures that were posted on DPI. So he used to joke with me every Halloween and be anxious to see what costume I had on.
I met Mark back in 1995. I had been at North High 1 year, and then Mark came my second year at North. We both taught history and we shared a classroom together. Mark coached football and I was athletic trainer at the time as well. And then of course, Mark transitioned into leadership roles. I believe he wanted to make an impact on a much larger scale than what he was doing. He saw that he could be effective in that role. Mark was influenced greatly by just his love of Wilkes County. He made a huge impact on his students and his student athletes that I still hear about. So I think for him, it was always about students first. What would benefit students the most, what was best for Wilkes County, and I think that was always at the forefront of his mind. Going back to his competitiveness, Mark, Coach Joins, myself, we're at West Caldwell, and maybe we got overly into the game, overly excited maybe, and the referees gave us a yellow card. And we were spectators. And I didn't know spectators could get a yellow card. That's kind of a funny story. There's others. Another one would be, we had a person who used to teach history with us at North. And that person also transitioned into leadership in another county, and he passed away. Mark found out before I did. And Mark came up, made a special trip to North. First thing in the morning, called me to the office, tell me in person, so I wouldn't hear it from anyone else. And I think that speaks volumes about his character. He didn't have to do that. He could have made a phone call. He couldn't have done anything, but that wasn't Mark. It was all about people, county, students, staff. They're all at the forefront of his decision making.
I'm Mark's nephew. We spent a lot of time together, especially in the younger years of my life. Anything outdoors pretty much, between fishing and hunting. And I felt like I was lucky enough to be a part of his escape from everyday life, his hassle, his busyness. We had a special relationship. He definitely pushed me, but it was more through jokes. Me and Mark always joked. We were never serious. I mean, he was my family. He wasn't my principal. He wasn't my coach. He wasn't my teacher. But we always had a joke, and we always picked back and forth that once Mark retired, he would be the man that lived down by the river in a van.
When you're living in a van down by the river.
He wasn't about money. The small things, the outdoors, the sitting in the deer stand on a frosty morning, and that was the stuff he enjoyed. I found out that Mark kept a written journal. He would write down all those moments, that was something that was very special to him. And I truly think that's who he really was as a person. I think his biggest thing that he carried a very heavy burden for was wanting everybody to see their full potential in themselves. Even sometimes when people couldn't see their full potential, he could. And he wanted them to strive, to get there. And it never failed. We could never stop at a store and just get what we needed and leave. He always found somebody to interact with. I think sometimes he would talk to people not to talk to them, but to give them an opportunity to be heard, to make them know that somebody cares.
Some of my best memories probably is just out serving our schools. I remember back in COVID, he and I would go out to different schools and serve lunch in the lunch lines. When we were finished, we would have just food all over us. I remember one day, we were dipping spaghetti. He missed the plate, went all over my leg, my shoes, and the cafeteria ladies would fuss at us because we were giving way too much food. We went through twice as much food as we should have, and they finally just came over and grabbed our hands and said, "You guys got to stop." He never met a stranger. I can't tell you the times we would run into former students he had when he worked in other districts, former staff members, and he could walk right up to them, address them by name, and share something about them that was important to that individual at that given moment. And he treated me the same way. He came by my office almost every day just to stick his head in and ask me how I am, when really I should be asking him how he is each and every day. But he made it a point to check on me. I remember in the time of my father passing, he reached out on a daily basis during that time just to make sure I was okay and that I was taken care of. And that's just the type of person he was. He had that ability to connect. It's just that leadership gift that he was gifted with, and not everyone is.
He was just always so chill. I feel like I won't realize it until I get in my office. I can still hear him walking over to my office, that he has a very distinct walk that most of the people in the office could hear him coming. Mark was a true champion for students, and anyone who's ever worked with him, administrators, principals, staff members, have always heard him say that students always come first. And he was not the type of person that just because of his title, he wasn't going to talk to a parent about a concern that they had. He genuinely loved making connections with people.
He's very involved in our community, very well liked, very well respected. He leaves a big void there because not everyone is a leader that Mark Byrd was. He was always the same Mark. Whether it was a civic meeting, education meeting, he always made time to be part of that, and he did as the voice for the students and teachers and the community.
Lots of times I would meet him in the hallway out there, and he'd walk around with his chest all popped out and stuff, and I'd say, "Mark, where'd you get that jacket you got?" And he would tell me where he got it, and I said, "Well, you need it next time you go get a bigger size." I think of Mark every day, especially when I see a black Toyota pickup. That's what he drove most of the time. Yeah, I keep looking, I'm thinking, then I say, well, I know it's not him, but I wish it was. He left a legacy for someone to look up to and follow his footsteps.
One of the things he always talked about was the picture of Daniel in the lion's den. He said, "Look at that picture." And I said, "It's his picture." He said, "Yeah, but look at Daniel. He's not looking at the lion, he's looking up. So he's not focusing on the problem, he's focused on the solution." And that probably helped Mark, because being a superintendent, there's people coming from all sides. I just think his legacy will be one of remembrance, and one of the people that Mark's worked with, they saw him lead by example. So that's made a huge impact, I think. I think he believed that if he surrounded himself with good people, good things would happen.
Well, I think people will always know that he cared about people and he cared about the kids. I had one student that had written a letter to him, and he was just talking about how he appreciated that when he came to our school to visit one day, that he actually sat down and ate lunch with him. And he just thought that was the coolest thing, and he was so appreciative that he got to spend that time with him. He worked his way up, and I know he worked in other school systems, but I think he always felt like Wilkes County was home. I know he was very proud of Wilkes County schools.
Mark had a sign on his classroom door that said, "Many people have dreams, but only a few stay awake and do them." And I think that perfectly encapsulates a lot of what he accomplished. One takeaway from Mark is that he cared about his family, he cared about his friends, he cared about his community, He cared about his students and his staff, and I think that was what it was most important to him at all times.
A lot of times I noticed if I was with him and we saw some of his former students, you know, it wasn't a hand wave or nothing. I mean, it was a yell across the parking lot at the convenience store, and it probably wasn't their name. It was probably their nickname that they gave him in football. You know, it's just, and that's who he was outside of work. He could, you know, let the professional down a little bit, and that's who he was, you know. There's definitely gonna be a void. And as far as his legacy goes, he is his legacy.
Mark did a great job of putting himself in the role of a bus driver, the role of a custodian, the role of a cafeteria employee, the role of a teacher or a principal. He always just wanted to keep people at the front. That was what he was focused on, was people and connecting with them. His genuine care would be a lasting impact. His ability to be the leader that he needed to be each and every day, but also just the ability to let his hair down, be human, laugh with you, celebrate with you, but also lead you. There's just not many people that can connect with people the way Mark did. He's just going to be greatly missed.
Yeah, I've hit everything in my life, but my knees